I kind of understood from the very beginning that the world wasn't right, both in what I saw and what I heard and what I read and would watch on the news, or even just watching the experiences of my friends, my parents' friends, and the very discussions that I would have with my parents. That capacity, and I guess I kind of just lucked out because I was able to see what was for what it was, really guided me going forward. Now, hi, my name is Frank Ortiz, and I'm from Philadelphia, PA. I am, in my honest opinion, a justice advocate. Now, for me, what does that mean? Well, it's a case where I'm trying to do my part to realize this world as a fair, free, just, self-determining world. And everything that I undertake is designed to help push the needle towards that in a number of different ways. I'm, to the best of my ability, attempting to create an environment where my students self-direct and self-determine their education by giving them choices, by letting them understand, basically like in using principles of economics, how they can go and create the grades they want, the products they want, and fundamentally enjoy their education while they're trying to do this. So that's one aspect. I do the same thing over at Temple University, where I teach courses for the College of Engineering, where given a course topic, I turn the tables on my students and I have them teach the class, but I give them goals and allow them the freedom to determine how they want to address those goals. I don't micromanage. I will coach them up on their skills, but at the end of the day, those slides are their own. I am a cycling advocate. Having worked for the Bicycle Coalition, and in particular coaching youth cycling over at Strawberry Mansion, for instance, but also here at Quadrat, where I'm trying to build up a team that goes out and rides, that goes out and potentially have a few people that go out and do races as well. I am a prior director of the Henry George School of Social Science, which was a facility that was open for decades here in Philadelphia, focused on economic justice by understanding the relationship between land, natural resources, and economic opportunity. And coupled with my wife, Carly Fretner, both of us are also advocates for gender justice, gender identity justice, and basic human rights across the spectrum. I was born in New York City in a Catholic hospital in Queens, in a part of Queens called Richmond Hill. In fact, it was St. John's University Hospital, which in an alternate reality, had my parents not moved us out when I was 13 to New Jersey, that's probably the school I would have gone to. I kind of understood from the very beginning that the world wasn't right, both in what I saw and what I heard and what I read and would watch on the news, or even just watching the experiences of my friends, my parents' friends, and the very discussions that I would have with my parents. That capacity, and I guess I kind of just lucked out because I was able to see what was for what it was, really guided me going forward. Now, the next question was, you knew something wasn't right, but the question was, what was it? And how do you find it out? And that would be a very, very, very long journey. Going through changes in colleges, changes in careers, changes within the same career of who I worked for and where that took place. Changes in the people who were in my life. So because of this constant need to want to understand, I went through a tremendous amount of change. And in all of those venues and more. But where does it come from? I mean, I don't know. One thing I always was good at was just picking out patterns, and patterns that didn't work or stood out. And then the question then became, what's going on there? So, and it's funny because this capacity has popped up in the classroom. It's popped up when I go and I train for cycling. It's popped up when I interact with people in general. So I would suspect that I kind of always had the capacity and the appetite for justice. It took me a while to realize it. And I will say this, that it really took on a life of its own in two separate instances. One was where I became the director of the Henry George School. It was the first time I was given the opportunity to run a facility, to lead a staff, albeit for a very short time. And the second one, which was linked to the first, was meeting my wife. And it's ironic how we met. I took it upon myself as the director to invite Occupy Philadelphia to our facility, to the Henry George School of Social Science, because I wanted them to get comfortable in our space, to see our art, our artifacts, and to ask questions about them, to ask questions about the relationship between land, natural resources, and economic opportunity. So anyhow, one of these meetings, she happened to walk in, and we more or less hit it off, especially at the end of that meeting when she came up and asked how I was doing, and asked about something I had mentioned earlier. And we agreed to go exchange emails. But anyway, I know it's such a techie thing, from not a millennial thing, they do it with text, but like, a Gen Xer like myself, where, we're the Atari generation. Email was a big deal for us 20 years ago. But the reason why I cite my meeting her was because she was already an advocate for women's rights and LGBTQ rights. In fact, as a child, her mother would take her to abortion clinics to protect women who were coming in for treatment against people who were there to intimidate those folks from exercising their rights. And she brought that aspect into what I was trying to do. And more or less began to put a human face on justice as I saw it than even what I had had before, which it did, but she just made it even more so. Through her, I've made many connections, because she's a Quaker and she's a very well befriended Quaker at that. And I just got to understand and build my network and understand the movements they were undertaking, how I could play a role in them, and what are they doing that works. So when I talk about being a director for the Henry George School as one thing and meeting my wife as the other, all of that is more or less what I mean by that. I, from a young age, appreciated playing sports. And for me, I wanted to be good at whatever it is I would be doing. For me, it was trying to be good at baseball, football, basketball. I wasn't, for the simple reason that I'm not a fast twitch athlete. I didn't know that. That concept was unbeknownst to me. It probably wasn't unbeknownst to most exercise professionals at that time when I was a kid, which was the 80s. But I wasn't, and it disappointed me. That always kind of stayed with me. Eventually, I learned how to use skill and awareness to be decent at basketball for a while, but I'd hurt my knee playing football, and it always kept me from being really, really good and competitive at basketball. So eventually, I had to walk away from that. One day, it just hit me that I needed more cardiovascular exercise, because when I stopped basketball, I started lifting, and lifting was okay. I enjoyed it. But I needed to get something so that my heart would get working. An instinct hit me that this was the direction I needed to go in. So I decided, all right, I'm just gonna get a bicycle. So one day I went out to the nearby flea market, saw the first nice bike I saw and bought it for $10. It was a beautiful blue Panasonic 3, and that was about the only thing I was right about the bike, because it worked perfectly, but it did not fit me. It was way too small, and it was a woman's bike. So, I mean, between the weight and the ill fit, I wasn't gonna go fast on that thing. But that said, I rode it. I rode it to the gym, I rode it to work, and I liked it. Now, my mom, who is a very formative figure for me, when I told her I was doing this, her first response wasn't a question, it was a statement. But you have a car. And she just left it at that. It kind of speaks to her worldview of that the role that I needed to play was to climb up the social ladder for the purposes of justifying myself, my parents, and my family at large. Amongst the many justice discussions I had with my parents, that was a point of contention. And it would remain so for a time. Anyway, I started riding. Around that time, I moved down to Florida, and I joined a club of people who would go and ride. And there I started riding with the old men, going and doing pancake rides, where they would go out to this place and get all-you-can-eat buffet, pancake, eggs, bacon. They probably would take on more calories than they burnt off riding that ride. But that was all I could handle at the time. But eventually I got stronger, and I rode with faster people, some of whom had done races. One actually, and when he would show up, he would kick our butts, was a Masters World Championship caliber track racer. I forget which competitions in track racing, where track you basically bike on an oval, and there's like a dozen different sports within that that you can compete on the bicycle in that. Anyway, you know, he had gone for the prior 3 or 4 years to Worlds and competed there. Anyway, so whenever we sprinted, he destroyed all of us, and it wasn't even pretty. Anyhow, there I got to appreciate going fast, even if I wasn't the fastest there. Fast forward a few years, where in between that I go to England. I appreciate riding, I brought my bike. I made sure I did that. Riding their hills, joining group rides, and enjoying spin classes for the first time. You know, building a really solid base of fitness, such that when I came back and rode against that Worlds guy, he still beat me, but the look on his face, the first time he sprints, he wins, he turns and looks, expecting to see everyone like about 1,000 feet back, and sees that I was only like about 50 feet behind him, was priceless. You know, of course, I didn't understand why I had been able to close that gap. I mean, was it just, I just biked a lot. So later on, I would move from where I was living at that point in time, which was Florida, back up to New Jersey, South Jersey in particular, and I got to appreciate the open roads that they had there, because New Jersey, they don't just like pave roads, they pave shoulders, like wide, 5-foot shoulders, which is almost like a lane in its own right. And it's a nice, those shoulders are fantastic for riding and riding safely. And I had hundreds of miles to choose from. And in my summers, just went out and just knocked myself out going and riding. It was the first time I actually did my first 10,000 mile year doing that. And that was all outdoors too. Well, mostly. Some of it was in spin class. During that time, that was the first time I actually raced in the US. I'd done 2 short races in the UK, getting dropped both times because I was riding a steel bike against aluminum and carbon fiber bikes with guys who knew how to race, who knew how to turn, who knew how to handle being in a group, whereas I was a complete noob in all of those categories. So anyway, fast forward to, this is probably like about 10 years ago. I go and I join the team in New Jersey, a team called Pro Pedals, named after a bicycle shop in Hamilton, New Jersey. And because their Saturday rides was the event that all the good cyclists would want to go to and crush. And it basically was like a 50-mile ride that was broken up into 5 different mini races, where you would have a sprint to finish for each one of those mini. Roll at a somewhat slower speed before beginning the next mini race. They wouldn't stop until they were done. So we're talking about like going from like 25 up towards to 30 miles per hour, sprinting, and then dropping to 20, not resting. No, just keeping going and seeing if you could drop some of the guys who slacked a bit. I loved it. It was hard, and it made me want to find ways to get better. So anyway, so fast forward a few years, I changed teams a couple times, and I don't actually get better, and this puzzles me immensely. I put in the miles, I do the hard rides, it doesn't work out. Eventually, I decided to get one of my teammates to coach me. And within weeks, I go and I win my first race. But after that, I start getting weaker and weaker and weaker and start having the similar results to what I was doing before. And I'm puzzled by this. The following year, I have a crash, I break my collarbone, and it takes me a while to get back into shape. Eventually, I kind of realized I need to match my training to the races I do to some extent, and that helps a little bit, but that's not enough. The final bit was for me, and this kind of happened to me over the summer, was I always knew that my weakness was that I wasn't as strong as the other guys. I just wasn't. I could be more conditioned than them, but I didn't have the strength to put forth the big efforts as many times, as long as them, and I would get tired 5-10 minutes before them and be holding on for dear life. So I recognized that I needed to address that directly. So I brought back, I'd experimented many times with weightlifting for the purpose of cycling training. And I happened to find for me the right touch, which of the right amount of weight, reps, intensity and duration to facilitate getting stronger literally every single day. Now I'm not going to share that because that's my secret. Because from that point on, I started to enjoy race like the other guys. Be able to put in good, strong efforts, both in short duration and for an entire event. And it's funny because I knew from almost at the very beginning, strength was a critical weakness, but I had to go through an experiment to find the way to address strength in a way that would best benefit me and how I train. So I could well talk about what I do now, but it may not benefit very many people because their weakness may well be something else, like aerobic capacity, or maybe the ability to process oxygen, or the ability to get waste out of the system, or to expel carbon dioxide, or something else entirely different. But for me, strength work did the trick, but not just strength work, but the right amount. And at this point in time, I am in the role where I am enjoying just like beating people in a way that I never had before. I'm planning for next year to be kind of like a breakout year, and with respect to on the bike, on my trainer, and out on the road. So early next year, late February, there's a national championship race on a platform that I race on called Zwift. And Zwift does simulated bicycle races where you're on your bike, it's generating power values in watts that the computer then, based on your weights and your heights, figures out how fast you're going. Whether you're in a pack or not, going uphill, downhill, and I use a Wahoo Kicker, which is a smart trainer that changes resistance based on your incline. Increasing it if you're going uphill, and increasing it if that gradient uphill increases all the more, up to a maximum. And so that's my first one, is to go there and to win. Because I believe I can. I mean, here's the funny part, is once I added strength work, my ability, my strength, my muscular endurance, which is the ability to apply force for duration, and my sprint ability. I was always a bad sprinter. And bear in mind what I said earlier about being a slow twitch athlete, was that I would have really, really bad sprints. And so in racing, I would always take unconscionable attacks because I knew I couldn't sprint. Blow up and then finish, instead of like top 10, I would finish like 30th or 50th or dead last. But now that I know I can sprint, and now that I know I can stay with the leaders at the pointy end of a race, I can sit there, I can kind of chill, and then when it's time to go, crush it. So that's the first one. The second one is that Pennsylvania has like a year-long championship of sets of races, and their scoring system's kind of cool. You pick whichever races you can, and your best 8 results you're scored on. And whoever has the most points, that's your champion. I would like to win that. I also, while along the way, earn enough points, upgrade points, to get my license. Because in USA Cycling, they have an upgrade system where you earn the right to go up and race against better competition. I started as a Cat 5. It's easy to get up to 4. You just do 10 races, which I did, and got up to 4. To make the transition from 4 to 3, I kind of just did enough races, getting close enough. I focused on top 20 finishes, 20 races, 20 top 20 finishes to get up to 3. Normally people, that was the cheap, easy way to do it. Harder is to get top 10s, which I wasn't getting. Harder still was to win races or get like top 3s and points. I was nowhere near able to do that. Yeah, and it was as a 3, now basically backdooring my way up to a Cat 3, that I was getting my butt handed to me. So I've been a Cat 3 now for 6 years now, and that's a long time. I know I had a former teammate who was a Cat 3 for that long and decided to quit and became a world-class CrossFit guy in Masters. Go figure. No, I decided to stick it out and find a way to solve the problem. So I want to upgrade my category from 3 to 2. And that means I got to go and win races, get top 3s, top 5s, maybe even top 10s if the field is large enough. For my particular joy is stage racing. Races that take 2, 3, 4 days, where there's a race on each separate day. And there's 3 or 4 that I've got circled for next year. Killington stage race in June, Giro di Cielo in New Jersey, Tour of Millsburg in Pennsylvania, and the big one, the Green Mountain Stage Race in Vermont the weekend preceding Labor Day, and actually including Labor Day. Now, I'm going to have to twist my boss's arm to permit me to go and do that and drive back Tuesday, the first day of school, or we could just move the first day of school to a Wednesday. But that's kind of a big deal for me, to go there and be at least a top 3, if not win that altogether. So those are my goals, and they're pretty big. I mean, we're talking about like winning potentially 2 championships, and competing at a high level in stage races, which draws the best racers from an entire region, and basically representing well in every single one of them. But I feel like I can do that. You know, and it's funny, when you go and you address your weaknesses, all of a sudden, that which you struggled with becomes so much easier and so much more predictable. And that's where I find myself. Now, this ties into my pursuit of justice, because one of the things that's perpetuated upon all of us is this idea that we cannot do, we cannot be, we cannot grow. And when I look at the course of my life, it's been predicated on being the best that I can be as a person, as an athlete, and in all the capacities that I undertake. And I am hopeful that in sharing my story, that obviously this interview will be one of them, but you know, whether it's print or whatever, that the main point that comes across was, here's someone who was at a place, determined that place wasn't enough, and was determined to find a way upward, onward, every single time. Now, while he may well suffer heartbreak and disappointment, and where spirit, heart, body, and mind may at different times or even the same time be broken, have that utter, sheer determination to effect the right kind of change, to find their way regardless of what it would take. That would be a good summary of my story up to this point. And if I was to express what the next part of my life is going to be, it's going to be about change, but not just mine. I'm done. As far as I'm concerned, I know I've got growing left to do, but my growing is more adjustments rather than fundamental change. I am largely the person I wanted to be when I was a child. That continued to evolve as I continued growing into adulthood and as an adult. But really, it's about helping others to be their best self. This is what fundamentally guides my work in my teaching and in my research. Because I'm also taking classes over at Temple at their College of Education, getting a PhD in integrated studies. And really, it's like a STEM degree, where I'm not entirely sure what the PhD is going to be on, but it could be on self-directed learning. It could be on how schools can become self-sufficient in a number of different ways. Yeah, that's a discussion long term I'm going to have with my guiding professor. So. Over and broke this guy. Yeah. I needed a plate. I still got that plate. 2 years later, I was coaching juniors, and one of them crashed me out.
You riding, or they crashed into you?
He crashed into me. I was making a turn. Yeah. He didn't recognize that I'd put the hand gesture for the turn. Because we had just done a sprint, right. And I'd stopped and like slowing down. I figured everyone would watch me. Right. He didn't. He had his head down, still going full tilt, and just rammed right into me.
Crazy. That took you out.
Yeah, he was one of my Strawberry Mansion athletes too.
Okay, yeah. That's what, it's like North Philly, Strawberry Mansion. Is that north?
I was probably straight west, actually. I mean,
Okay,
dude,
okay.
you know where the reservoir is in Fairmount?
Nah,
Lloyd Hall?
nah.
How about the art museum?
I do know
All right,
that.
cool.
Yeah.
So if you go like a little bit north of that, that's Strawberry Mansion.
Okay, okay, got you.
They call it Brewery Town now.
It's the high school, right? Or okay, yep.
Over on Ridge Ave.
Okay. Two, one, no. Two, one.
I always had an appreciation of helping others learn. Math kind of always came easy to me. Once my mom helped me with multiplication, everything else was just uh, child's play. And so occasionally I'd be mentoring other people, whether it was my brother or my colleagues in class, on just stuff that I figured out in math. And I liked it. I basically never really thought about what I wanted to do for a living. I kind of just floated along as a high school kid until the time came. It's like, oh my God, I got to go to college. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? So I was like, well, let's aim for the stars. And literally, I was thinking about that. I was like, all right, I like math and I like science. So I'm going to go to NASA and be a rocket scientist or something like that. So I apply, I get into Rutgers, I go and I absolutely bomb at it. And not because I couldn't do it, but because for me, I had never learned time management. I had never learned to be a self-directed learner. I just went where I was told to go, which is basically how 90-something% of high school students go to school. Is the bell rings and like Pavlov's dog, they go from this point to that point. And then they sit down and they take in whatever it is the teacher's throwing at them. Lecture, activities, worksheets, and that kind of summarizes my experience in education, and did not serve me. I actually didn't know how to write a paper until I was a few years into college, and I had to teach myself. Pretty simple method too. I realized that I had to take the question that my professor gave me and break it down to a whole series of smaller questions. And then if I had to, if I needed even more length, break each one of those into additional feeder questions, and then proceed to answer them one after the other until I had my paper. It's a pretty simple method, and it's served me quite well in the years since. It basically, and that was entirely self-directed. No one told me that. No one helped, guided me. No one asked me the right question, had me thinking about how to do that. I just figured it out myself. So, like, when I decided, after struggling as a mechanical engineer, as a mechanical engineering student, I decided to transition to becoming a teacher. So I go change my major, get my physics degree, because I still like science. I was going to get a minor in mathematics, but I changed that to Spanish because I thought that would be cool. It still is. And on top of that, and then got my master's in science education. Now, my time at Rutgers getting that master's helped me to understand a lot of theory, but they really didn't go deep into practice. Like, I really didn't know how to design a lesson. I didn't know how to incorporate the assets that I would have available. The growing internet, I didn't know how to use that. I didn't know how to incorporate books into my curriculum, activities into what I wanted my students to do. I had to figure out all that by myself, which made my first year very, 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 very challenging. In fact, I would say that first half of that first year, I was probably as bad as anybody in America. But I mean, everything I would understand afterwards came from knowing what didn't work, which was what that first year was all about. Now, one thing that was kind of stressed upon me, both by my education and by my early work experiences, was I had to have strong classroom management. Now, it basically, when I look back on that, the term classroom management really is just a polite way of saying mind control. It's a way of getting an entire group of people to think and do what you want them to. And I just found that morally repugnant. Even during those times where I knew I had to get better at it, I found it increasingly distasteful. And yet, I had to adopt methods that incorporated that, and I developed some pretty decent ones. I wound up becoming a fairly good authoritarian, even as I disagreed with what I was doing. And here I am with this conflict of how I believe in this fair, free, just, self-determining world, but yet I'm doing the complete opposite. And this is a conflict that would go on for a number of years. I would have a random experience. This experience occurred when I was teaching in the UK, and from my prior answer where I brought my bike, I had fun there, but I was there to work. I was there to work in an experimental school. And on an off day, on a day of school where there was a competition, a physics competition, I was to take my class over there and have them compete against other schools. It was there that I gave a basic goal to my students and then stood back and let them figure it out. I focused more on just getting them to feel good about being there and enjoying the experience. And as a result, they surprised me and surprised themselves and surprised the people at the competition. Now, the school I worked at was an experimental school, a public-private cooperation. It was called King's College for the Arts and Technology in Guildford, in the county of Surrey, in the United Kingdom. The community it served was a very poor one, which shocks people when I tell them that. And they would think England is this well-off country where everybody does okay. No, they got problems too. They got big problems. And in fact, I would argue that their class conflicts are even more profound than ours, because ours are a little more temporary compared to theirs that have been ingrained over the past millennium of development as a group of people, the aristocracy, followed by the business owners, the bourgeoisie, kind of stratified themselves into various distinctions that you are where you started from or where you happen to climb yourself to, and you are nothing else. Even though I was in one of the most well-off counties, I saw tremendous poverty there all the same, and it made me ask questions. But going back to teaching, that experience introduced to me this concept of maybe I could trust, to some extent, students to be able to figure things out themselves. Because I had done the complete opposite. I basically broke down my course into a whole series of little steps that were easy enough to jump from one to the next. I basically took the Kumon method, which was a system of teaching math, which was like increasingly progressive problems, math problems, and applied it to physics, and done a fairly good job of it. It's such that like when I came back to New Jersey, it was an immediate success at the school that I worked at. This Kumon physics hybrid thingy. But again, it was strictly an authoritarian tool with a series of, using grading basically, to induce compliance by my students. It was sheer, unadulterated force in the classroom. And I wasn't happy about it, even as I was implementing it successfully. Ultimately, I wanted to live in Philadelphia because my time in the UK, I enjoyed the walking city. And if there's anything about New Jersey, it is not a walking state. So I moved here. I worked for the School District of Philadelphia for a few years. It was absolutely horrible because another component I needed to understand was trauma. The students that go to schools here in the city, it doesn't matter if it's the best schools or the worst schools, suffer a whole range of indignities at home, in the streets, in schools. And when I get them, they have all of this baggage and all of these trigger points and just this built up idea that they cannot do, that no one trusts them, no one cares about them, no one likes them. And I walk into that my first day at University City High School, 2010, and without any understanding for any of that. One, that it existed. Two, that I would need to deal with it. Three, how to do so successfully. And I basically got my ass handed to me. So here I am, 2010, getting my ass handed to me on bike racing, getting it handed to me in the classroom. And I was kind of disappointed with what I was doing, how I was doing. Because I'm going from a school where I was doing amazing to all of a sudden, I might well be the worst guy in that building. Again, here I am, a 10th year teacher, and it's like I forgot how to teach. Fast forward a couple years to my last year in the school district and teaching over at Germantown High School. I go there and I have an assistant principal who has no faith in me whatsoever. And to some extent, that's kind of justified because I wasn't doing great. With every single advantage that that school gave me, and again, that school gave me way more advantages. A limited schedule, good spaces between classes, and my own classroom, which was not a given for very many people in that building. I was still struggling. I decided to try an experimental system that I heard about over the summer. It was called the layered curriculum. And I took my physics class, and I kind of began to mold something of that. And then I gave it to my students. And the way I did it with them was I gave them a whole pool of problems, and I would score them all differently, and they had to pick whichever one problems they wanted to do, but they had to score a certain amount of points. I do this, and the first thing they do is they go to sleep. And I decide, all right, let's see how this plays out, which already was a big step in the right direction for me. I would have been impatient and thrown out the door and tried something else, but I decided to give it time. So the first few days, they kind of just chilled, talked to each other, hung out, or slept. Towards the end of, this happened for like a week and a half, basically. I was being extremely patient. Finishing that second week where they were coming close to the end of the block of time that I would give them to finish that chapter's work, they started opening up the books. They started looking at the problems. They identified what they didn't understand from the questions, went over to the reading, figured out what they didn't understand about the readings, and started asking me questions about what this means. How do I do that? They started talking to each other about how to do this work. And I began to see for the first time in my classroom self-directed learning. And I knew it was possible. Now bear in mind, I'm doing this and it's working. My assistant principal, who I considered one of the most useless people I've ever come across in public education, hated it. The principal, who ironically enough was the complete opposite in how I viewed her, was one of the people I respected in education the most. I mean, there's probably like about 3 to 4 people who I see what they do and I'm in awe. And she was one of them. And she hated it too. But this came from her perspective as an authoritarian. And granted, she was really good at it. And what she was trying to do with that school was she was trying to turn over being an effective authoritarian to being one that fostered self-direction in her students. And unfortunately, she didn't she couldn't build the staff that she needed to foster that. And she thought I would be one of those people. I just wasn't there yet. She'd be disappointed in me. She was disappointed in me at that point in time. That said, I knew I was onto something. But I decided after that school year, step away, go back to college, become a mechanical engineer, which is what I wanted to be way back when. So I left. I went and I did that. And I was asked by a teaching friend of mine if I could go to Edison High School and mentor robotics. It's like, all right, cool. That's fun. I'll go check it out. I don't know first thing about robotics, except if there's moving parts, you put some programming in, and you make the robot do tricks. So I go there and I recognize the first day at this school that has a really incredible auto shop, that the kids come in, they're working on cars within the first few weeks, and they can rebuild, paint, fix, modify cars, and it's pretty impressive. The guy that runs that auto shop, his name is Ronald Price, runs a tight ship and a very effective one. Now, for those that don't know, Edison High School is a very poor high school, located in the Puerto Rican quarter of Philadelphia. In fact, I would say somewhere about 80–85% of the students are Hispanic, with the majority of them being Puerto Rican. Now, I go into this robotics club, which is purely voluntary. They go there because they enjoy it. And I recognize that this population has a really good technical understanding, but they have no sense of direction whatsoever. So I decide, okay, let's give them a simple goal. First day, I'm going to have them draw in groups, small groups. Draw a robot on a big sheet of paper. Here's some markers, go have fun. Go take 20 minutes. When they're done, they come back, they show what they have, and I challenge them to go together into a single large group and negotiate one drawing. A little bit messy, but they figure it out and they come up with one drawing. That was the end of that meeting. The next week, I come back and I give them a new goal. I say, here's a set of tools. Go build that. They had to go through a few iterations of what the pieces were, disassembling prior robotics work. Because this was a robotics kit that they were using that had been used at University City when I was working there, with the teacher who had asked me to help at Edison. And so this was like a 5-year-old kit that was donated to us by Drexel, that had been modified, built into stuff that had to be unscrewed and broken down. And so they did. It took about a month for them to figure out how to make a robot that could kind of work. They bring it to competition. It doesn't work there. They're disappointed, but they're resilient. And I say, all right, cool. Go simplify it further, because they were trying to do too much with this robot. They simplified even further. And they proceeded to get a robot that kind of worked, but still finished last in the next competition. And I kept moving the marker of, all right, cool. See if you can focus on these fundamental systems. And let's do a play test here and see if you can get it working in the classroom before we even go to our next competition. They do this and they finish top 5. Because they were able to, with the time that they had in class with me, to get it working. And just improved on that going forward. And just by giving them goals along the way of what to do, how to do it, I didn't so much go how to, but what goals to achieve, occasionally offering advice here and there, or stepping in when they were about to do things that were dangerous, like drilling into something that had live power. They figured out more or less within that structure of goal setting how to build a robot that would start to win. And they wound up winning their last 2 competitions within that league, including the regional championship. Now bear in mind, within this robotics competition, there's a number of schools that are fairly good that bring really large, capable teams with dedicated classroom time. So And this group of after-school volunteer kids who are doing this just for fun are beating kids who are spending an hour or 2 hours learning engineering and are beating them. Those schools would go and try and overkill and have these massive robots that would do everything that's possible to do. And it couldn't do one thing really, really well, like go forward consistently. It would do kind of a little bit of this, kind of a little bit of that, whereas the robot my guys made did one thing perfectly. Well, as close to perfectly as a human being can get it. And that's how they won. They understood where they were, what skills they had, what the goal of the game was, and put together a workable solution of their design that did this. And if that isn't self-directed learning, I don't know what is. They go to states, they finish 5th in the state. A group of Puerto Rican boys, 4 of them, got that far, did that. And that was the power of goal setting and self-directed learning. I was pretty much hooked from that point on. By this time, I'd basically been away from teaching for about a year and a half. I'm going to classes, and I recognized, all right, I'm running out of money. I need to get back to work. So I go, and I've had a few semesters taking classes there. All of my professors are awful. I won't say awful. The majority of them are really bad in a number of different ways. I had maybe one good professor because he provided tremendous resources on the internet that I was able to use to understand the concepts he needed me to. But the rest, straight lecture. I mean, I would go to class for 2.5 hours and they would talk for 2.5 hours. So I go to my department chair and I tell him I used to be a physics teacher, that I've got all this experience and I will offer myself, and I was wondering if it's possible to create a position to where I can go and skill up the teaching assistants and some of the professors. To an academic, and I say this as one now, it's easy to take that as saying, your staff is really bad, hire me, I'll make them less bad, or at least pretty good. So I'm amazed he didn't just say, thank you very much, have a nice day, and by the way, the door's that way. No, he said, wow, that's very entrepreneurial of you to think about having this skill set and creating a position for you. Let me think about this. Give me your email, give me your resume, I'll get back to you. And he did. He offered me to teach 2 classes at Temple. He was having trouble finding people to teach 2 sections for this class that the Department of Mechanical Engineering offered. And I pretty much fit the profile perfectly of what they were looking for. Someone who knew engineering, who knew how to teach, and could reach the population at large. Because this class was offered by the department for non-engineering students. So I went and I started doing that. I decided I'm going to do the lecture model because that was what professors did. I go through 3 days and I see already the disinterest in my students in the class and the topic and the increasing disengagement. And I decided after 3 days, screw this, I'm going to go back to self-directed learning. But how do I do that though? I got 2 books. I have to cover the material in the books. And they can read the books. So I decide, all right, I'm going to make them teach the books. And I've gone through several iterations of how to do that, starting with giving them each a few pages and writing up on the board, to progressing to using Microsoft PowerPoint, to developing the peer review system, the question and answer system that those that are watching others present ask and follow up on that. And it became a pretty evolved system that started using some pretty heady, cutting-edge educational theory. At least that's what my current professor tells me when she heard about what I was doing. And I was doing this 4 years ago. And from that, I learned how to manage self-directed learners. and just got better at that. I actually used this too to put together and manage a skill sharing conference in Oakland. Now, I'd never been to Oakland, so I didn't know what the venue looked like. I didn't know who would be showing up, but I was able to lead a group of highly skilled professionals to identify the tasks that had to be done, who would do it, but I didn't do it by telling people what to do. I just gave goals. Sometimes I offered suggestions and permitted them to modify or even negate or replace my suggestions. And we came up with a workable action plan that they had effectively created that met these goals, as well as a series of steps that they would follow, and I would just keep up with them to make sure they were following on their ideas. There I kind of appreciated the power of trusting people to create their own solutions, because when they do it, they've got buy-in, and they have fun in implementing it. As a result, that conference went off really, really well. In fact, the only thing that might have been problematic, that what turned out not to be, was video, which was out of my responsibility. That was someone else's job. So here I am, I'm doing something that worked with a robotics club, that worked with physics students, that worked with engineering college students, and I was doing it now with working professionals. And by the way, I was also at the time too coaching cycling at Strawberry Mansion, and I was doing more of the same thing. I only replaced a tire one time if I could help it. And I would show a bunch of people, and the next time there was a flat, one of those guys that saw me would teach someone else. I would run practices for a little while, and then I would have students running drills and co-leading practices, helping my non-riders learn how to ride, to go out and lead fast rides or slow ones while I took care of other students. In essence, it was kind of like a divide and conquer sort of thing, but I was using my students to do the dividing and the conquering. And I kind of recognized, it doesn't matter who I've got, I can find a way to create a workable solution with that group of people that was given to me. And it kind of leads to where I'm at now, which was that it just goes right back to trust. I didn't trust for so long. But I had to also do the work of understanding what is it that I have to achieve at the end, let them know what that product is, and then kind of step back and see what happens as long as I need to. And occasionally stepping in to course correct, but then step back. And that's more or less kind of where I'm at in education, in teaching. Is for me, teaching isn't something you do, it's something you kind of help someone else as they're teaching themselves. That's when it's at its best. This past Thursday, I was in my PhD class for education, and the class is called Motivation Education. I was especially excited to take this class. I had two options, and this is the one that made me want to take it. But anyway, in this class, we were supposed to collaborate in pairs on a paper that's due this Thursday. And I know what I want to write it on. That's really not the point of the story. But I recognized that the person I was paired with had an idea, kinda, sorta, but she wasn't really excited. I could tell that she wasn't excited about it. And I asked her about something she had done in the classroom that surprised her. It surprised, like, what the student's response was. And to my surprise, she couldn't think of anything. And so I asked the next question, which was, have you ever tried to put in a strategy to address a problem that that just popped in your head and go ahead and try that? And she said no. And I'm thinking, okay, this is probably like a first or second year teacher. She turned out she was a fifth year teacher who basically came out of college with an approach and just stuck with that approach like a robot. Now, I didn't say robot to her, but I did say that, and I told her that I was putting on my principal hat in doing this. And it's ironic I say that and describe myself as a principal because in the midst of having so many bad vice principals and a few bad principals, I just felt like I could do a better job than all those guys, and I feel like I'm kind of proving myself right. But that aside, I tell this young lady, her name's Lisa, and Lisa, she should have a log that she keeps. So at the end of the day, spend about a good 10, 20 minutes and just reflect on the day. What went well, what didn't go well, what did she do, were there any surprises from that? Whatever other thoughts pop in, just put together a memo, a day-to-day memo, put the date on there, and then the next day repeat that again, and then again. And give herself an opportunity to reflect and grow on her profession. So that's, because the idea is we're supposed to identify where our challenges are and then find a way to problem solve around that, either by creating solutions ourselves, collaborating with a peer on ideas, or stealing someone else's idea altogether. So that's an example of a practice that I would love to see happen more often, where it's just more innovation, experimentation in the classroom. Because even as I was working in the profession as an authoritarian, I was constantly trying new methods. Oftentimes just dropping everything I was doing to do this entirely different thing. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I was literally like a scientist in the classroom. If there was a person who I really, really would love to go on a bike ride with, and this is kind of a surprise, it would be Lance Armstrong. And the reason why is because even though he suffered the indignity of being essentially tossed out of professional cycling for the use of performance-enhancing drugs and participating in a vast conspiracy to keep that information from being shared with the public for more than a decade. He did this in an era where doping was endemic in his sport, and yet was able to, in the grandest race of them all, the grandest stage race of his sport, to go through and consistently beat the best. That's not an accident. This was a man who has shared a likewise determination to win. Going out and experimenting with diets, with training, with racing, incorporating science in every single facet of his sport that he could. And just to go and talk problem solving with the man would be incredible, because that's something I kind of take pride in myself. Now, if there's anyone in education I would want to work with, there's two people that come to mind. One would be Howard Gardner, the man who conceived the concept of multiple intelligences, and just pick his brain for how I can do what I do to activate more parts of the brain. Basically the gist of the conversation is, how do I create a self-directed learning environment that fires up more and more parts and creates more opportunities for different types of learners to excel in the classroom. The other person I would want to talk to would be my old professor from Rutgers, who helped me understand a lot about science ed theory. And her name is Eugenia Edkina. She's one of the best physics educators, I think, in the world. And to be able to go back to her now with an understanding of self-directed learning that she was trying to help me with, but she couldn't put it in words such that I could understand at the time. And such that the questions she gave me rang through my mind through more than a decade until I started to find my way to answering them. So to go back to her as a fully realized educator, to the point where I am in a position to help others become strong educators in developing self-directed learners, would be a powerful opportunity for me. And if I had any advice for other people, I mean, find With respect to justice, to have whatever remediations are put in place, to have it stick, you have to ensure that people are fully able to economically self-determine. And the way you do that is permitting access for anyone to be able to access the commons. Land, air, water, metal, natural resources, geosynchronous orbits, patents, copyrights. All of those have to be reformed insofar as how we manage them and access them to allow anyone the opportunity to be able to do so. And the best way to do it is to incorporate the element of cost. If we do that, we'll find that our economic problems disappear almost overnight. If I was to offer any piece of advice to other people, it's trust. Trust other people, trust their intentions, trust yourself and what you want and what you're feeling, what your instincts say. And most particularly, trust your passion, trust your joy. That which brings you joy, passionate joy, that's really what you should be doing. Now, I was told by a student that you should have three things in your life. Something you do for work, for employment, or to earn a living. Something you do as a hobby, and something you do as service back to the community. And if you can get all three of those to line up, shucks, you're lucky. But really all of that is embedded in joy. You have to trust your joy.